Hello, I'm here to talk to you about how to conduct an online family therapy counselling session. I'm well aware that our colleagues in rural remote services have been doing this for a very long time, and I'm sure they would have things to contribute to this presentation that I haven't thought about. But for many of us facing the COVID-19 crisis, we have been forced to think about how we conduct our practice through media other than face-to-face. Family therapists are very used to having everybody in the room around them, being able to work directly with people in the room, move people around the room and move ourselves around the room in a way that allows us to conduct our practice. Now we're being challenged to do something different, and it's probably about time. There are many families far away from city centres or places where family therapists work who could benefit by family therapy practices. This is a relatively short presentation for a big topic, so I'm going to skim over some issues, but hopefully highlight the ones that I think are the most important. I want to start with safety. Safety is imperative, of course, for all of us. We need to know where our clients are. When our clients are in our room, if we need to call police or mental health triage or 000, we know that they are contained in our space. Unless we check that our clients are at the address that we have on our file, or that we even have an address, we don't know where they are. So if something went wrong, it would be very difficult for us to know where to send help. Not only that, there may not be much help close at hand, although we do have telephone counselling services that may be of some assistance if things got very difficult. It may also be worth, in the setting up phase, and I think setting up online family therapy is probably the crucial thing we need to do, is to get a second address, almost like the next of kin. So if anything were to go wrong, who should we call? Who is close at hand who could come and assist you? It's also important in terms of safety, both for the practitioner and the client, to check on the confidentiality. We need to know that the client is operating in a contained and safe space, that others are not overhearing, and particularly children. I was talking to a colleague the other day who spoke about conducting couples therapy in the family's car. He said it worked really well. The parents could see the children playing outside. If he wanted to speak with one person alone, he was able to do that, and the children could see where the parents were. I think we need to think creatively about the spaces in people's homes and how these can be effectively used working with whole families. I think the other thing is to check that your online delivery has a blur background function, that it's for two reasons. One is if you're working out of a private space, a home or your own private space, you don't necessarily want our clients to see things about us that may be private. We also need to make sure that where we position ourselves and how we present ourselves is as we would in an ordinary clinical session. I heard a very funny story about a man who was fully in a suit and he had to get up, and it became clear that he was wearing sloth-patterned pyjama pants. Presenting ourselves as we would face-to-face is important on two levels. One is, if we do have to move, we don't want to embarrass ourselves. Secondly, we want to have ourselves in the frame of reference of being the professional delivering the family therapy service. I think it's important to bookend our sessions, to have much clearer delineations of when a session is beginning and when it ends. Of course, when you come into a clinic, that's very obvious. People come in, they meet the receptionist, they wait in the waiting room, and then they're taken into the therapy room. There is a discontinuity between ordinary life and therapy. If therapy's been conducted in the home, it's too easy for the two to be blurred. That may mean that people don't take the conversation as seriously as we would like them to do. It also means that at the end of the session, we need to have some finishing point and some agreement between us and them that our conversation is finished and any matters that were transacted together throughout the session are not going to be carried into everyday life. They are not going to result in uncontrolled or very distressing exchanges, but somehow we can agree that they remain in that space that for that moment in time we are calling therapy. It's probably helpful if the family agree that on a space or a room that they use, that it's set up like the therapeutic space with the chairs around, and that we formally and officially begin and end our work. This is also a time where time and space are different. Time can go quicker or faster conducted online. Sometimes the hour seems to go very fast, particularly if there are a lot of people and we're trying to manage a lot of difficult things, and sometimes it seems to drag. We need, therefore, to have processes and protocols, which I'll talk about in a minute, that actually manage the time we have, that allow everybody to know what is happening when. This is where a process like Bower Note is particularly useful, because Bower Note, the process we use at Bower Place, includes an agenda. And the agenda tells everybody what we're doing, when we're doing it, and how we're doing it. It tells us that, first of all, we begin by getting a request. Then if it's a first visit, there's an ecogram and a timeline, that we talk about the problem, we take a break, we think about the client request, we come back, we give advice based on the client request, and then we decide what needs to happen next, which we call follow-up, and finally feedback. Now, that's a very quick description of quite a complicated process, but what it does for us is it tells us and the client what's happening when. And this is very helpful. It's helpful for both parties. It helps us structure the time we have, and it also equalises the relationship between practitioner and client, in that it allows the client to understand what's going on in our head, rather than them engaging in a process that is being entirely run by an agenda that they can't see or know. It's always useful to write down the agenda in front of the client, and as we complete each item, to tick it off. But again, I'll refer to that in a minute in terms of taking notes. Space is also different. Paradoxically, we feel closer to people. We feel more intimately in their space, and we feel we're sitting closer when we are sitting close to our screen and they are sitting close to theirs than we would do in an ordinary session. Particularly working with a group, we need to move our chairs back so that we can get a sense of space and see each person well. I think it's very important when setting the session up that we ensure that everybody is seated in a place where they can be seen. This is also a time where it's very helpful to have an assistant, where we have an assistant who can be more in touch with the people who are not speaking at that particular moment. And I think especially with family therapy, where we rely a lot on the interactions between people, and often the interactions that we aren't focusing on as well as those that we are, it's useful to have someone else as our co-therapist who can both take our notes and watch for interactions that we may not notice. These are the sorts of things that perhaps we're talking to the mother and the father may well be rolling his eyes and looking exasperated to the eldest child. If you're very focused, particularly working online, if you're very focused on one person, it's often hard to see what's going on the side. So I think in many respects, we're looking at a different negotiation of responsibility and authority in the therapeutic space and the therapeutic practice. And it might be worth looking at what we deem the responsibility of the practitioner and what we deem the responsibility of the client. It is the client's responsibility to clearly and actively explain the process of the session. This comes back to what I was saying earlier about using the protocols of Bower Place, where we explain to everybody exactly what's going to happen when and how it's going to work. So we set a frame around the whole conversation, which needs to be firmer and clearer given that this is being conducted at a distance than it would be if people were in your own space. We need to cover off on all those things that we would ordinarily do. We talk about confidentiality. We talk about limits to confidentiality. We explain, in our case, that we will take a break in the middle of the session. I think working online, a break is really, really helpful for all parties concerned. This is what we would do working face-to-face. I think we do it when we work online. A break can also be an opportunity where we reinforce those boundaries around the therapeutic space. So we may actually ask the family to leave the session and the space that we've been talking in, and to everybody to go to their own space for the 10 minutes that the therapist and the co-therapist may be thinking about what advice they're going to give. We may also, as if we come back to authority and responsibility, the responsibility of the practitioner is also responsible to get people to move around the space if they find that they're sitting in a way we can't see them. It's not fair that someone misses out or can't be seen properly because we haven't clearly said, could you just move so-and-so's chair in a bit closer? I can't really see them. It's harder to get people to shift position at a distance, but again, that is something I think we need to take responsibility for. It's also our responsibility to set rules and boundaries in collaboration with the client. So what are the rules of this exchange? And the rules, again, are not very different from what we would do in our own space. But I think we co-create them very much with the client when it's being held in their space. So is it okay for people to leave to go and turn the dinner off? And if they need to turn the dinner off, do we stop the whole session or do we continue? And again, I think that's something that we would work out together. So it may be that we say, okay, it's all right to step out to turn the oven off, but we're going to stop the conversation for now and just wait till you come straight back. It's not okay, I think, for people to come and go freely to do all sorts of things and miss out on the bulk of the conversation. This is something we see happen even in our therapy rooms, where if things get more difficult or more stressful, people may choose to leave or want to leave. And then how do we, in collaboration with the family, decide how we're going to manage that coming and going, and what does it mean for the session? I think we need to be clear that for us, we need, if we're doing family therapy, we would like the family to be present, and then we need the support and collaboration of the family and the senior members of the family to ensure that happens. So our task is, once we've made those rules, those boundaries, those agreements about how therapy will look, how people will conduct themselves, then it's our task to reinforce them in the session. We also need to manage talk time. It's hard enough sometimes with everybody in front of you and people all beginning to talk at once to hear what's going on. There's a lag when you work online. There's a lag between you speaking, them hearing, them responding, and you hearing. And if everybody begins to speak at once, it can become very chaotic. So you have to be aware of that time difference and be willing to pause, be willing to ask people just to hold a thought for a moment while you listen to this person, and then manage that question of time and talk time and not talking over each other. It's our responsibility to follow the agenda. Having set an agenda, whatever that looks like, it is then the practitioner's task to ensure that that agenda is followed in the time that we've been given to do it. It's our responsibility to deliver advice of some shape or form. Again, just as we would do in a face-to-face session, my recommendation is that you take the break, you have explained the break when you've explained the whole process, take the break, people go to their spaces, therapist and co-therapist converse about what should happen, and then come back and deliver the advice. It's the practitioner's responsibility to be very clear about what needs to happen next. Are we meeting again? Are additional services required? Is everybody safe? Are they safe with themselves, and are they safe with each other? And if they're not, what we're going to do about that. It's also the practitioner's responsibility to have organised a process whereby the client can access their notes and be ready for the next session. I find online that it's quite useful as part of follow-up to set the family the task of thinking about the items they would like on the agenda for the next session, so that both they and you come perhaps more prepared than is necessary when we're working in real time. And finally, it is very important in a family session, or in fact in any online session, that we go through the process of feedback. Feedback is where we ask the client to tell us what their experience of the session was like, and if there's anything they would like us to do differently next time. We need to hear from every single family member, just as we need to get a request for practice at the beginning from every single member. We want to know what people want us to work towards, and we do that at the beginning, and we want to know how people have experienced the session, and we do that at the end. And this is a time where it's not a good idea for anyone to be allowed to leave the session before the session is formally completed. It's the client's responsibility to be on time and to not leave the session even if it gets difficult. I'm very happy for clients to negotiate a break if they're finding it difficult, but it's not okay for people just to walk in or out, or we're unable to do our job. And this is something that can be transacted, again, right at the beginning. At the beginning, when we talk about the protocols, we talk about confidentiality and the limits to confidentiality, when we'll breach confidentiality, and then something about how the client family is going to manage staying in the session and in the conversation, even when it becomes challenging. I think it's also important that we have some agreements about not transacting stressful and difficult and potentially dangerous topics away from the therapeutic space. This again is about reinforcing this boundary, that this is the place where we talk about these matters, and unless our advice directly asks for particular topics to be discussed between particular people in a bounded way, the overall rule is that therapy happens within the therapeutic space, and difficult matters in the short term are not transacted outside that space. So that's our responsibility, that is our client's responsibility, and then there's the joint responsibility. The joint responsibility, again, begins with the co-creation of rules and boundaries. And I've come back to this repeatedly. The idea that both they and us need to have an agreement about how we create a therapeutic space in a personal space, in a family home or similar, and how we protect both that space from these things leaking into it and protect the individuals who live there. It's also good to get the client to co-create the notes, to entrust some or all of them to help make the ecogram at their end. So before the session begins, we would ask that they collected A3 paper or whatever paper they can find, Textacolours, so that they can make the ecogram as we make the ecogram, and they can begin to jot down their own notes. There then needs to be a negotiated process of how the practitioner's notes are shared with the client down the track. And finally, the support of the practitioner to help them keep everybody safe. I start with safety, I finish with safety. It is probably the most crucial part of all of this. We are not there to actively intervene if someone becomes suicidal, self-harming, hurting another person. We need, when things are calm and orderly, to work out how those issues would be managed should they happen. And finally, I want to say again, the value and the power of ritual. We need rituals to reinforce boundaries. and a conversation with the family about how they're going to protect and preserve their lounge room so that most of the time it's a lounge room and occasionally it's a therapy room is a good conversation to have. Rituals can be devised by the family. So it may be that everybody agrees that when they're doing a therapeutic session, they don't have particular cushions on the chairs, and that the cushions denote being family, and when the cushions are removed, it's therapy time. Anything like that, anything that makes a difference, that shows this is a different space, is worth working out with the family. I'd like to thank you for listening. I do hope this was useful and that you've been able to apply some of these ideas into your own practice.